On Christmas Eve 1945, a house burned to the ground in a small town in West Virginia. Five children have inside when it happened. But when the fire was finally put out the next morning, investigators searched through the ashes and found something that made no sense. No bones, no teeth, no remains of any kind. For the next 40 years, the children's own parents refused to believe that they had died in that fire. And what happened over the following decades would turn a small town tragedy into one of America's most unsettling, unsolved mysteries. George and Jenny Sodder were Italian immigrants who had built a life in Fayetteville, West Virginia. They had nine children. George ran a successful coal trucking business, and the family was well known and, by most accounts, well liked in the community. Though George was outspoken and not shy about criticizing the local government or expressing strong opinions in public, something that would later matter more than anyone expected. On the night of December 24th, most of the family had gone to bed after a normal Christmas Eve. Jenny was startled awake around 1 in the morning by a strong noise on the roof, followed by a smell of smoke. By the end, she woke the household. The fire had already taken hold on the staircase leading to the upper floor, where five of her children were sleeping: Morris, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, ranging in age from 5 to 14. George and the children who escaped tried desperately to get back inside, but the stairs were already engulfed. He tried to break a window using a ladder he kept by the house. The ladder was missing, later found oddly displaced far from where it was normally kept. He tried moving his coal truck closer to the house to climb onto the roof. Both trucks, which had worked perfectly the day before, refused to start. A neighbor rushed to a nearby store to call the fire department. But when she picked up the phone, the line was dead. The fire department was only 5 miles away. Once contacted through another route, it still took them almost 7 hours to arrive at the scene, long after the house had burned completely to the ground. By the time firefighters actually reached the property, there was nothing left to save, and nothing left, it seemed, to find. The official investigation concluded the fire was caused by faulty wiring and that the five missing children had died being completely ceremated in the blaze. But the Sodders refused to accept that. A fire hot enough to fully cremate a human body typically needs to burn for a sustained 2 hours at extremely high controlled temperatures. Nothing like an uncontrollable house fire that consumed a wooden structure in under an hour. Search teams combed through the debris and the surrounding property repeatedly. They never found a single bone, tooth, or fragmented belongings to any of the five children. Unsatisfied, George Sodder began digging into the case himself. He later learned that the local fire chief had privately admitted to finding what he described as human organs in the ashes. Organs that were then placed in a box and quietly buried, without ever being examined, tested, or reported as part of the official investigation. Years afterward, when George dug through the actual site of the fire himself, he uncovered a hardened coin from the pile. A coin that, under the extreme sustained heat needed to fully cremate five bodies, should have melted into an unorganizable lump. It hadn't. Weeks before the fire, a man had come to the house attempting to sell George life insurance. When George declined, the man reportedly told him his house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. Because of comments George had made criticizing political figures. Around the same time, someone had been removing the fuse block from the side of the house. The exact piece of equipment that investigators would have needed to determine whether the fire had actually started electrically. The most haunting twist came 23 years later in 1968. Jenny Sodder received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a grown man who bore a striking resemblance to what her son Louis would have looked like as an adult. On the back was a short cryptic message referencing the children, but nothing that identified who sent it. The photo was never traced, no sender was ever found. The Souders spent the rest of their lives convinced their children hadn't died that night at all, that the fire had been set deliberately to cover up a kidnapping. They erected a billboard on their property for the children's photo, offering a reward for information, and it stood on the land for decades. To this day, there has no been official resolution, no confirmed remains, and no explanation for the missing fuse block, and the dead phone line, the delayed fire trucks, or the photograph that arrived 23 years later. What do you think really happened that night? Tragic accident or something far more deliberate? Let me know in the comments.